Tons of news topics to talk about today, but let's start with 50 series super leaks with Kopite 7 Kimmy. Our favorite GPU leaker has got a ton of things right in the past. Doesn't mean these will be right, but long track record, etc., all of that. Let's at least hear what he has to say. Apparently, there is a 5070 super being planned, and that it will have 6400 cores, and it will have 18 gigabytes of GDDR7 VRAM. Now, how would we get to something like 18 gigabytes? Well, the trick is that the 50 series cards have been using GDDR7, but they have been using the 2 gigabyte modules. Basically, if you have a certain bit bus width, you can only hook up a certain number of VRAM modules, which is why you end up with weird things like the 5060 Ti having a 16 gigabyte version, but the 5070 only being 12 gigabytes. A lot of people are confused why something like that would happen. Well, it's because they're on a different bit bus, so it gives you different combinations possible. So the 5070, for example, could have been 12 or 24, and they went with 12. And the 5060 Ti could have been 8 or 16, and they went with both. There's both options. Now, how would the 5070 then have a super variant at 18 while still being on the same 192-bit bus? The way you change that is by having each VRAM module have more VRAM in it, and that would be using 3 gigabyte modules instead of 2 gigabyte modules, which we have been using. That gets you a 50% increase to VRAM, so we go from 12 up to 18 while still being on a 192-bit bus. Would have been nice to have those the first time around, but hey, at least maybe the super cards will be correcting for that VRAM deficiency on the original models. Now, this isn't the only leak he just did. Also looking at 5070 Ti Super, and here talking about getting up to 24 gigabytes of VRAM here, up from the 16 on the non-super model. Once again, that's a 50% VRAM increase, which would be explained by using those 3 gigabyte modules in place of the 2 gigabyte modules. We've also got some core counts here for these and all of that, and earlier we've heard leaks about the 5080 Super already. Now, videocards.com has already summarized these general leaked specs into this helpful chart. So let's go ahead and pull it up here. By the way, all my sources will, of course, be linked in the video description as usual. And what we're seeing here is that this would mean that the 5080 Super is rumored to have the same number of CUDA cores as the non-super version. And the main change here would be the increased VRAM capacity. Also an increased TGP, which while that could potentially be like clocking it higher, a little bit of an OC, and it wouldn't be unheard of for them to do a slightly faster variant, it also just using more VRAM would require more energy as well. So that explains some of that TGP, but again, keep in mind this is all just rumored. Also, then, if we look at the 5070 Ti and the 5070 Ti Super, what we're once again seeing is the same number of CUDA cores for the Super variant, but again, a power increase from 300 watts to 350 watts, and again, a VRAM increase from 16 to 24. This, once again, could have a lot of that power increase explained by just having the increased VRAM capacity and that requiring energy to run, but also could include maybe faster clock speeds as well. But here's where the 5070 Super, I think, is a little bit more exciting, which is that we're, in addition to getting the increased VRAM capacity, we're also getting a few more cores. Looks like going up from 6144 up to 6400. So definitely will be at least a little bit faster in addition to the additional VRAM. Here we're seeing a 25 watt increase. Again, some of that needs to, be running the additional VRAM and all of that. But this one, I think, is also, in addition to just having more cores, whereas the other ones aren't, the other reason why I think this one's more exciting is 16 gigabytes of VRAM is mostly fine at this point. I'm not saying that you won't eventually appreciate the additional VRAM capacity for gaming, but 16 is mostly fine. Now, 12 isn't incredibly problematic right now, but we are already seeing some cases where 12 isn't great. And we'll certainly start running into issues with 12 long before we'll run into issues with 16. So fixing the 5070 from 12 up to 18 is a much bigger fix than going from 16 to 24, in my opinion. So really, a lot of this comes down to, first of all, will these actually launch? Because I think Compite's generally good as far as leaking stuff that Nvidia is currently planning, but things that they're planning doesn't always end up being things that actually get launched. So there's still that big question mark. But hopefully we get this, and then the other question mark would be pricing and when is it available? So there's all of that. Now, as far as availability goes, this videocards.com article is reminding us that Benchlife had previously rumored that the 50 series super refresh would be expected in CES of 2025. I think that would be January. So we're talking a good half year out at least before even getting the beginnings of these. And then do they all launch at the same time, or do they kind of space them out months apart? There's all sorts of ways they could go with this. So a lot unknown, but at least, especially with this 5070 Super being rumored to go up to 18 gigabytes of VRAM, that really solidifies one of the main reasons not to buy a 5070 over some of its competitors from AMD that offer 16 gigabytes of VRAM in that same kind of price class. So this would go a long ways to solving that problem. Also giving it a bit more performance would probably help it stay ahead of the 9070 non-XT at least, and then shore up that VRAM capacity difference. Now, in my opinion, what I would really like to see from a Super Series refresh would be a 5060 Super that came with those 3 gigabyte modules that would take us from 8 gigabytes of VRAM up to 12. Because getting a 5060 with 12 gigabytes of VRAM, if it could stay mostly at the same MSRP at that around $300, to me that would be the most exciting thing, because that would actually help people buying a $300 graphics card have an option that's well above the 8 gigabyte capacity. That would be really cool, but at this point, we don't officially have any rumored or at least leaked specs on that. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it isn't coming. Maybe we'll get those leaks later, or maybe they would eventually release one later. But we do have to think about the last time we got a Super lineup with the 40 series, they didn't give us a 4060 Super, and they left the 4060 at 8 gigabytes. So it's possible that we won't get that, and I think that would be a huge shame. Although, if Nvidia kind of relies on their 5050 at 8 gigabytes to kind of fill in that bottom end 8 gigabyte, cheap model, and then maybe that would leave them room to push out that 5060 Super with 12 gigabytes. That would be nice. We could hope for it. But now let's actually talk a little bit about the 5050, because remember, this is coming in July, and that is official. This is not rumors. However, when exactly in July? So the official announcement from Nvidia, at least in my region, was second half of July. But we're seeing some interesting headlines mentioning that that second half of July tag isn't there on the announcements in some other regions. For example, we're seeing that the China version of the slide is saying it will be available in July, not specifying the second half. Now, those aren't inconsistent. In July could just mean second half of July. But there's some discussion that apparently maybe these could be made available at any point in July for board partners that would have that ready, but that just the timing of all of this and shipping dates and when they're getting drivers and supplies to board partners and whatnot might end up making it not really possible until the second half of July. But we'll have to kind of see what happens with availability, at least especially in the China region. We'll have to see what goes with that. Anyway, another bit of controversy popping up around the RTX 5050 is that the laptop version is spec'd out with GDDR7, whereas the desktop version, where you generally get the higher end variant if there's differences between the two variants, is spec'd out with GDDR6. So this would be an interesting case where the laptop version could be higher spec'd than the desktop version. Now, Nvidia's Ben Barondo, I might be mispronouncing his last name, apologies if I did, has replied to Hardware Canucks saying pointing out this discrepancy. What's with this? And we do have an official reply from Nvidia saying, the RTX 5050 notebook GPU has been optimized for the best power efficiency for portable laptops with great battery life. Therefore, G6 is the best choice for desktops, and the more power-efficient G7 is the best choice for laptops. Now, my issue with this statement is I agree with half of it, right? I do absolutely see why the increased power efficiency of GDDR7 makes it the best choice for laptops. Where I don't see the logical connection here is why does that then make GDDR6 the best choice for desktops? I think the unspoken part of that is they can probably get away with GDDR6 on desktop by just because they can just throw more power at it and probably not see a huge performance differences. I guess what he's saying is you're probably not. They can probably get away with GDDR6 on the desktop platform easier because they don't have to push for so much energy efficiency. That doesn't mean that GDDR7 wouldn't have been better. It just means they can get away with it on desktop. So I'm not sure that means it's the best choice for desktop for anything other than cost savings. Now, if that does help keep down the MSRP, whatever. I mean, maybe that does still make it the best choice for desktop, but kind of just seems like it's a cost-cutting measure. Let's hope the consumer is getting some of those cost savings. That's the part I'm less convinced on. But anyway, we're also seeing that DLSS Transformer model has officially left beta. A lot of people hadn't really been making much out of the fact that the Transformer model for DLSS, which has shown massive image quality improvements in tons of games, was officially in beta up till now. It was not officially launched. So that was an important distinction, although it was generally in better and was actually even officially supported in games. It has now officially left beta. Along with that, there's been interesting headlines that at first I think sound a lot more exciting than they actually are, saying that Nvidia's DLSS Transformer model slashes VRAM usage by 20%, bringing smoother performance on mid-range GPUs. Now, it's important to note that this is technically correct when you're comparing that 20% VRAM savings to the correct thing. It is not, for example, saying that a game using 10 gigabytes of VRAM, to make the numbers easy here, are now only going to be using 8 gigabytes of VRAM. That is absolutely not what that 20% savings is saying. It's saying that the DLSS model is 20% more efficient in this newest version in its VRAM usage, but that's only talking about the VRAM being used by the DLSS model. So just make sure you're understanding that, because I've seen some people reading these types of headlines and thinking that this equates to some massive savings in VRAM for Nvidia users that is somehow making like the 8 gigabyte card suddenly, totally viable, etc. That is not what this is saying. So in the older DLSS versions, the CNN model used significantly less VRAM than the Transformer model. We're talking at 1080p, a difference between like 60 megabytes versus 100 megabytes. Now in the newer model, it's looking like it's kind of in between. It's still using more than the previous CNN model, but using less than the previous Transformer model. So the latest Transformer model variant is more VRAM efficient than the previous Transformer model variant, but still uses more VRAM than the CNN model, and we're talking differences in the dozens of megabytes, not in the multiple gigabytes, because, again, we're just talking about the VRAM usage of the DLSS model itself, not the entire game becoming 20% more efficient. So just important to understand what this is saying. Still nice that they're able to rein in the VRAM footprint of the Transformer model. Efficiency is good as long as the image quality is still good. But just make sure we understand what it's talking about here. Now, in other Twitter leaks, we've got XHL saying that GPD STX Halo handheld prototype. What is this talking about here? So there's been a big discussion over AMD's massive APU with their Strix Halo. Strix Halo has 40 compute units, which is absolutely insane compared to any other APU that AMD has released on PCs. Absolutely massive, but there's been some questions over whether it makes sense for handhelds, because handhelds need to worry a lot about battery life. And so feeding 40 compute units is going to require a lot of energy. Now, you can run it at lower power, but then do you still get the performance benefit from the 40 compute units to make it make sense, given the expense of the part, etc.? So this is an interesting leak in that it is a time spy score specifically for a prototype of a Strix Halo with the full AI Max Plus 395 with Radeon 8060S. It's painful to even say that name, but anyway, the full thing. Now, performance-wise, it's scoring over 10,000 points in Time Spy, notably even the graphics score over 10,000 points. Now, that is interesting because as WCCF Tech has helpfully put together here, maybe let me zoom out a bit, that puts it significantly ahead, especially in the graphics score, compared to other handhelds and laptops using AMD's previous Radeon APUs. Things like with a Radeon 890M scoring down in the 3400 range for overall score and graphics score barely over 3000. 880M scoring a graphics score below 3000. Seeing some of the newest ARC APUs and most powerful ARC graphics scoring barely over 4,000 points in Time Spy. And now we're seeing that this apparent handheld prototype scoring over 10,000. That is massive. But it is also still a question mark at like what power settings was that running at? Because is this going to be reasonable for a handheld device? So that's still a question mark, and note that this is still a prototype, so we'll have to see whether it becomes a released product. Certainly interesting though. Now, speaking of Intel graphics performance and CPU performance, we are also, and Twitter leaks, we are getting a official looking slide, that doesn't mean it is official, claiming some performance gains for the Core Ultra 300 with Nova Lake. For gaming, the most interesting bit would be the single-threaded performance, where they're claiming a 10% improvement if this does indeed end up being official, and while a 60% multi-threaded performance. Now, multi-threaded performance isn't really going to translate to 60% better gaming performance. It's really the single-threaded performance where we generally see the gaming performance come in. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Anyway, it's at least nice that they're saying things like leadership gaming performance, because that does mean that they're claiming, at least in some capacity, to be able to be competitive here and claim leadership. Now, marketing slides can mean a lot of things with that and find some really tortured ways to claim leadership, even if they're not the fastest chip out there, so we'll have to see. But anyway, I'm hoping Intel can get back on track and get more competitive with AMD, because again, them being competitive here can help drive down prices, give the consumer more for their dollar, and that's what I want to see. So I'm rooting for Intel to get back in there and get competitive with AMD's gaming performance. Now I want to shift over to, we seem to be seeing a bunch of GPUs releasing that might be compatible with some small form factor systems. And along with that, we see Cooler Master launching an NR200P V3 ITX case optimized for the 50 series GPUs and such. So if you're into smaller form factors, that could be interesting. But also, you might find it interesting that Asus is revealing RTX 5060 low profile GPU with 3 fans. And we're also seeing Palette launching, not low profile, but at least slimmer versions of their Gaming Pro series for 5070 and 5070 Ti's. Also, for small form factor enthusiasts, it may be interesting that there is an upcoming GeForce RTX 5060 eGPU to feature both Oculink and Thunderbolt 5 support being revealed in prototype form by ETA Prime. But we're also seeing some other GPUs trying to stand out in other ways. For example, Asus is showing 5090 ROG Astral and RTX 5070 Ti Tough BTF series with hidden power connector designs. But then we're also seeing some other GPUs trying to stand out in other ways, like, for example, the Meow series. So with the 5050 coming out, we are seeing 5050 Meow cards. So if the 5050 can't stand out in performance, maybe it can at least stand out in Meow style. So we've got that. And not to be outdone, we of course have Yeston with their RTX 5060 cute pet graphics card designs. So there's that. And also not to be outdone, we have MSI with their Toy Story limited edition PC hardware, including a 5070 Buzz Lightyear GPU, along with a Woody motherboard, but it does look like this is only to be sold in Taiwan. Now, let's switch over to some interesting, software developments. So it's always interesting to look at what sort of graphics research is being done to push performance along with visuals, and push visuals without a massive performance cost. So we're seeing reports of AMD researchers managing to reduce GPU VRAM utilization of rendered trees by up to 600,000 times through a unique work graph technique. I found this report at WCCF Tech, but it looks like they're basing it off of a tweet from CompuSemble. Talking more about that research and saying that without work graphs, the trees in this scene would have required 34.8 gigabytes of VRAM, but with work graphs, only 51 kilobytes. Anyway, obviously, you're not going to be having RAN trees at 34.8 gigabytes anyway, so we'll have to see how this compares in actual use cases, etc. But it's always nice to see research being done. Hey, don't forget that we have the Steam Summer Sale going on. I don't know what you guys might be picking up on this, but I've certainly been scrolling through and trying to find what I might pick up. Honestly, I noticed It Takes Two is on sale. I might be grabbing that to see if my older daughter might be ready to try playing something like that with me. We'll have to see. But there's a bunch of stuff on sale here. So just let me know in the comment section what you guys are getting, because I always struggle to pick out. It's like the paradox of choice. There is so much here to choose from, and I already have a lot of it. But anyway, deciding what I'm going to go with there. Now, in other gaming news, though, it's possible that Fortnite owes you money. So the FTC will send more than $126 million in refunds to players over unwanted Fortnite purchases and reopens claims process for 2 more weeks. This is due to deceptive practices. I don't need to get into the details, but basically, deceptive shenanigans around buying stuff has potentially led to people buying stuff they didn't want, and they're in trouble, and so they have to refund people some money. Now, there's some class action lawsuit type situations or rulings where people in the end up getting like pennies, so it's kind of irrelevant, but I've been hearing that some people are actually getting a significant amount here, depending on how much you've spent on Fortnite. So if you spent a lot of money on Fortnite, it's possible Fortnite owes you some money back. So maybe take a look at that if you haven't yet. In other gaming news, I'm noticing that Stalker 2 a few days ago has gotten a big 1.5 patch. And reading through the list here, it seems like they're starting to make some of the big improvements to the A-Life system that people were upset were maybe not there at launch. Stalker 2 is a game I started playing at launch and then just felt like, if I come back in a while, this is going to be way better. So I haven't jumped in on the 1.5 patch yet. Maybe if you have, let me know. Is this the right time? Because I'm on summer break right now, so I have more gaming time. And I'm wrapping up a Divinity Original Sin 2 playthrough. And after that, I was considering, is Stalker 2 finally where I want it to be to play it? Let me know what you guys think in the comment section on the 1.5 patch. Is this where I want it to be? Interestingly, this has also, I think, come along with some mod tools. But I was seeing an article, I don't think I have it pulled up here, that the mod tools download is like 700 gigabytes. That's insane. Anyway, hope you brought your biggest SSD. And then I'll also mention that I always like tracking what is actually making money and selling in the gaming industry. And by the way, sales of games copies is not always the same thing as what's making money. And also what has the most people playing it. So we have some new stats from Newzoo on both monthly active users and top games by revenue. And there is obviously going to be some overlap here, like Fortnite's #1 for both. But not everything's the same. Now, one thing I spotted here, other than, of course, the top monthly active users, are the usual suspects of, your forever games. The top games by revenue, I was really excited to see Claire Obscure Expedition 33 move up 5 slots up to #8 here in top games by revenue. And again, some of the top ones here are the huge forever games like Fortnite. And that was pretty interesting to see, especially because this is May results. It was not a new game in May. So that is kind of rare for a, single player game that you just buy up front that's not getting a bunch of microtransaction stuff. To move up slots like this after release, and that has to be a show of positive word of mouth leading to a long tail on sales. So that's pretty cool there. And I'm just gonna shamelessly plug Claire Obscure Expedition 33 once again on the channel. This game is awesome, check it out. Now, I think I'll close here for the news today. Looks like we got a long enough video for you. Let me know what you guys think about all of this in the comment section as usual. Huge thank you to viewers, subscribers, and channel members who've clicked the join button to directly support financially. Makes doing all of this so much more possible. So thank you to those. Totally understand not everybody's in a financial position to do that. No hard feelings, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.